Andrew co-founded the Origins Conference with myself. It was like a questing conference, a Megalithomania collaboration back in November 2013. Obviously, we've had lots of interesting people come along: Graham Hancock, Robert Bouvard, Robert Temple, everyone here. Lots of very cool people. So we're had a nice run over the last few years. And Andrew, as you know, is one of the foremost researchers on ancient civilizations. He's made major breakthroughs with what's being discovered in southeast Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, and his books he's written about that. And now Karahan Tepe, obviously, but also he discovered what Zahi Hawass calls the Collins Caves under the Giza Plateau with Nigel Skinner Simpson some years ago. Wrote a book about it called Beneath the Pyramids. So he's gone down really in Egyptian modern folklore for that. And I think he kind of probably got in trouble for that, like he does almost everywhere he researches and goes nowadays, including Turkey, but that seems to be okay now. So with that in mind, on the screen here, we have From the Ashes of Angels, which came out in 1996, which he was writing as Göbekli Tepe was being uncovered, predicting many things that have occurred. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for the conference, Andrew Collins. So thank you very much.
Good day, folks. Thank you for coming to Origins. We've got a lot to talk about here on the back of all the wonderful lectures that we've already had. I'm going to be telling you all about what's been discovered at Karahan Tepe over the last couple of years. But before that, a little story. Because back in 1996, a book of mine called From the Ashes of Angels was published. You can see the cover on the screen here. And it proposed that the founders of the Neolithic Revolution were a shamanic elite that thrived in eastern Anatolia at the end of the last ice age. This Neolithic shamanic elite are remembered as the Watchers, Nephilim, and Anunnaki of myth and legend, their homeland being the true Garden of Eden. Look for it in southeastern eastern Turkey. Okay, now that book was written in 1995, just as the first spades were hitting the ground at Göbekli Tepe. I mean, directly. I was in England, and they were working at Göbekli Tepe, and it had been discovered the previous year in 1994 by Professor Klaus Schmidt, the late great. And excavations began there in fall of 1995. And the site was made public in January 2000 for the first time. Okay, and obviously you can see on the screen as it looked after it was fully uncovered. This is enclosure C, looking towards the south. Now, the story continues because in 2002, the book was published in Turkey for the first time, and this allowed me to go out there to promote it 2 years later in 2004. And as part of my deal, as it were, to come out there, they gave me a driver and an interpreter for a week to go around all of the sites I'd written about or was about to write about in something new. And this allowed me to get to Göbekli Tepe for the first time, which you can see me there. Now you can see the enclosures behind me. I mean, there was nobody there. I mean, the only person that came across to say hi was the locals. They were very pleased to see us, to see visitors. There was no archaeologists, nobody else there, and you can just walk around the site. Clearly different today. And the fruits of what I wrote about, of what I saw that day and what I experienced, was published in a book called The Cygnus Mystery in 2006. But whilst I was there, I went to Harran, the ancient Sabian city, which is about 25 miles from Şanlıurfa, the big city that's by Göbekli Tepe. And whilst I was there staring up at this astronomical tower, these children came up and tried to sell me a second-hand book, a guidebook. And, I took it because there were some interesting bits. It mentioned a place called Karahan Tepe. And it said that it was in the Tek Tek Mountains. And it said that a few interesting features had been found there, including this T-shaped pillar that you can see on the screen now. And I looked at this and I thought, oh my God, this is part of the same culture as Göbekli Tepe. And I thought, I've got to get there. And you can see Göbekli Tepe on the screen there. You can see Şanlıurfa on the left. And you can see Karahan here in the Tepe Mountains. And between them is the Harran Plain. So I thought, I've got to get there. I've just got to get there. I mean, you know, whilst I'm out here, let's go and investigate it and see what's there. Well, when I got there, I found that it was covered with, well, it was a hill that was covered in like a really sort of heavy, stony soil, sticking out of which were standing stones all over the place. I mean, when I say standing stones, essentially T-shaped pillars. You can see quite a few of them here. And some of them had what we call test pits around them. And these had been dug in the late 1990s by an archaeologist from Harran University named Bahattin Çelik. And basically, these are just test pits to see what's there, see if there's any carvings or whatever. And a few of the stones had these around them. We also found, you know, other bits and pieces just lying around. I mean, including this mini T-shaped stone here, which you can see just being turned over, just a tiny little thing, and a number of what we call these porthole window frames. Now, that's me there in 2004. I don't know what the hell's going on in my head there, but I look very odd. Quite clearly, having discovered this site for the first time, I'm thinking, what the hell is going on here? So that's what I'm doing. Well, obviously, I'm touching this porthole stone. Now, the thing is, these are so well carved, and here's more examples of them, all from Karahan Tepe, that they look like something from a Gothic window out of a cathedral no more than 800 years old. I mean, I've found fragments of carvings like this from old Gothic chapels and stuff like that on my rounds out and about. And yet these, I was certain, were anything up to 11,000 years old. I mean, the one on the bottom right that you can see here, I mean, this was even being used as the edging of a fire pit on the top of Karahan. So clearly this place intrigued me, and I started visiting it again and again. Obviously, Hugh's already mentioned that we went there on various occasions and found various other features of interest, including the fact that on the top of the hill were all these strange, these holes bored into the bedrock. Now, you find them also at Göbekli Tepe and a few of the other pre-pottery and Neolithic sites in the area. And some of them are in pairs, and they're much larger, and in my opinion, are meant to represent eyes, something looking out at you from the rock itself. So, you know, this was it. Plus, there was an unfinished monolith on the so-called eastern terrace at Karahan. That means it faces out towards the west and is in the east as it looks out. And here's Hugh looking at it now. It's anything up to about 5 meters in length. There's a similar unfinished stone at Göbekli Tepe, and this one was just left there as it is, and it's still there today. And the local farmers, who I got to know very, very well, would just find bits and pieces out and about. I mean, for instance, these vats, one on the left made of stone, another smaller one on the right, were just lying about in their fields, and they just bring them to the farmhouse and put them into use for some other mundane purpose. And yeah, this is the evidence that something was here 11,000 years ago. And so, you know, I would go there on various occasions. I'll show you the fruits of some of that research as we go along. And the last time I was there is in 2018. But that was then, and this is now. Because from 2019 onwards, workers taken place there, excavations that have revealed an extraordinary complex. And I cannot use that word extraordinary enough. In fact, I'm willing to say that this site is arguably more important than Göbekli Tepe for a number of reasons. You can see that there are many different enclosures. Some of them are small, some of them are large. Pillars so far. They've found 4 big, important so-called special buildings, as they call them. We'll go into 3 of those today. And as many as about a dozen smaller, tiny enclosures, very much similar to Göbekli Tepe, where you've got the deep enclosures on the bedrock and the much smaller, younger ones on top of them, higher up in the occupational mound. And here is just some of the items that has been found at Karahan that are now on display in Şanlıurfa Museum. And we're not going to go into all of these in any detail because I just honestly don't know much about them. And I only received these pictures today. But, I mean, just look at them. I mean, the level of sophistication here is absolutely extraordinary. And although we've seen some of this carving, similar stuff at Göbekli Tepe, this takes it to the absolute next level. So, this is just, I mean, I can just look at this for the next hour, but we've got to move on. So thank you, Damla, for these pictures. Now, the definition of the word civilization in the Webster's dictionary is the condition that exists when people have developed effective ways of organizing society and care about art, science, etc. Well, as I will show you, the people at Karahan Tepe and Göbekli Tepe and all of these other sites that we now know exist in this area have all of this and more. So there's no way that we can now not consider them a civilization that existed at the end of the last ice age. I mean, I'm onto this. Obviously, Q, JJ are onto this. They're going out there. I want to go out there as soon as I possibly can. Graham Hancock went out there last December and is working relating to it. But the guy that we've got to thank for all of this, not only Bahattin Shelek, that did all the early work there in the 1990s and continued to visit the site through the 2000s until relatively recently. I'm sure he still goes. The other main guy we need to thank is Dr. Neshmi Karul of Istanbul University, who you can see here. Now, he's just published his first paper on the site. The details of there, also the details are on 2 videos that I've done of these discoveries that have been put out the past couple of weeks. So if you need the details, let me know. But they're out there. And they give us our first inkling of the specifics of the different monuments that we find there. And he talks about 4 special buildings according to their time of discovery: AA, AB, AC, and AD. Now, we'll call AA the Great Ellipse, we'll call AB the Pillar Shrine, we'll call AC, still to be uncovered, and AD the Pit Shrine, for reasons which you'll see as we go along. But the schematic plan on the left just shows you what we're talking about. There's Karahan. It is orientated roughly north-south. On the eastern side of it is the Western Terrace. That's what the paper from Carroll talks about, the Western Terrace. The Eastern Terrace is on the other side. That's where that unfinished monolith is. And the 3 monuments we're going to be talking about today is AD, AB, and AA. So that's basically that. AC is still being investigated. I don't know anything about it, so we won't be talking about that today. Rodney Hale, the engineer who I'm working with on all of this right now, has done this plan of the special buildings. You can see AD here, you can see AB and AA, and you can begin to realise that those 3 are interlinked. There's the Western Terrace there, which is right by the side of it. So the other important point before we go on any further is the southern side of Karahan Tepe. There is no monuments. All there are is evidence of domestic, mobile, portable items like grinding stones, etc., suggesting, as per Carroll's paper, that the south was considered domestic, where the dwellings people would live, whatever. This follows exactly the cosmic schema that we have from Çatalhöyük, which is a ceramic Neolithic complex city urban centre in central southern Anatolia. And there, the special buildings and, you know, even domestic buildings have a particular directional schema. The north relates to everything to do with death and the afterlife. The west is to do with death. The east is to do with life. And the south is, in other words, you do your eating, you're throwing away your rubbish and all the rest of it, to do with the south. To do with entering into the next world, it was the north and the west that were important. Also, the time, because this is revealed in Carroll's paper, because there are reports going around that this site is about 10,000 BC. I have seen no evidence of that as yet. What he says is that it dates to the late pre-pottery Neolithic A to the early pre-pottery Neolithic B. That gives us a date range of roughly 9,100 BC to 8,500 BC. Okay, that's the time frame of all of the monuments that you're going to be seeing. Now, it's not to say that there wasn't older stuff going on here, just that what we're dealing with at the moment and the alignments associated with them date to this time frame. Okay, this is structure AD. This is this huge ellipse which has been discovered. It's 23 meters in length and is quite extraordinary. I mean, it has many features in common with the enclosures at Göbekli Tepe, but a lot of differences as well. I mean, for instance, on the western side of it, you've got actually cut into the hill, cut into the bedrock, these extraordinary, what they're referring to as buttresses. Now, buttresses is something I associate with Gothic cathedrals, but here they are at Karahan around 9000 BC. And they divide these, what I call stone thrones, where quite clearly people would have sat and watched the activities going on actually inside the enclosure. Now, this, you know, everything here is on a different level to what's going on at Göbekli Tepe, which, let's point out, was older. Göbekli Tepe is at least 400 or 500 years older, possibly. Karahan is clearly what came next. It is the son of Göbekli Tepe. I know, you know, the term sister site has been used for a few years. I actually created that term, by the way, many years ago. And it is a sister site in a way, but in many ways, it's the progeny of Göbekli Tepe. What they were doing here was the next stage, the next level. And the Great Ellipse, you can see here, would seem to have an absolute perfect geometry associated with it. An ellipse which has a ratio of 6:5, or more correctly, I would say 32 to 27. It has a main axis, by the way, of what appears to be around 10 degrees east of north, with a cross axis of approximately 100 degrees south of east. And this, you know, this seems to be certain is there, but the reason why those particular ratios I think are significant is because they relate to intervals. Now, I'm not a musician, so I don't really understand what's going on here, but basically musical intervals are the combination of two particular sounds using certain ratios between the actual instrument that's created, you know, so that it's 6 of one and 5 of another as far as lengths are concerned. And 3227 is part of the Pythagorean system. You can see it there. I've underlined it. I'm not going into this, but we also find similar elliptical geometry at Göbekli Tepe, as you'll see. Now, the Great Ellipse has T-shaped enclosures, T-shaped pillars, just like Göbekli Tepe. But these have been fragmented for some reason, possibly when these enclosures were deliberately covered over in a very meticulous fashion. And you can see here that I've highlighted in red the two central pillars, and in black their positions of the slots in the ground where they would have been placed. And what's so interesting here is that those pillars do not seem to conform to the obvious geometry of that ellipse. And that ellipse is pretty sound. So we're still trying to work out exactly what's going on here, of why those central pillars should be off of the actual axis of the site, which is very clearly defined by these different monuments here. This long bench that's supported on either side, and what I call the southern entrance of the. It all seems to be pretty perfect to the geometry, but anyway, that's something for the future. Rodney Hale tried to construct one of the central pillars, which you can see on the left, using all of the pieces, and he shifted them all together, and that's what it appears like. And it is very, very close in size to the unfinished monolith on the eastern terrace of Karahan, which you can see here. So very clearly, these unfinished monoliths were for the larger enclosures that were being created at Karahan. Now, the other important thing here is that in his paper, Nejmi Carroll says, and I'll quote, "It's worth noting that structure AB, that's the pillar shrine, is reached by passing through AD, that's the ellipse. There is also a connection with structure AB2, AA. Nevertheless, the main entry is via AD. Therefore, we could assume structure AD to be the actual place of activities that took place, blah, blah, blah. The present evidence strongly suggests a ceremonial process entering the building from one end and exiting at the other, having to parade in presence of the human head featuring a phallic symbolism." Well, that's the head at the top. We'll come on to that shortly. But what he's trying to say, a processional or ritualistic route for the aspirant, as we'll call them, going from one building to the other. And this seems to be from AD here through AB through AA. So they are all interlinked. Okay, that's a very, very important statement. And also bearing in mind that that's from south to north. That's the direction of ritualistic activity, from the south to the north. And you enter from the ellipse, AD, into structure AB, which is the pillar range hole. It's only 70 centimetres in diameter. It's what we call a porthole. Graham Hancock, I've been in touch with about this, has actually crawled through that and got into the pillar shrine. And that's very clearly its function. It allows access from this ellipse where the main activities would have started to then go into this second of the structures for whatever comes next. Okay? And you have to wriggle your way through this. You don't, it's almost a difficult act to do that. And that's clearly part of some kind of experiential journey of the soul, because quite clearly this is not all done in a sane and sober state of mind. Altered states of consciousness would have been involved. Right, now, the other important thing to do with the relationship between the ellipse and the pillar shrine is that there is a precise alignment based on the ellipse into the pillar shrine. You can see this white line here showing it, and that will become important later, and it will essentially go through the porthole into the pillar shrine. So that's very important. It's an azimuth of 341 degrees. We'll come back to the significance of that. And here's that line then coming into the pillar shrine via this hole. And you can now begin to see what we've got inside that pillar shrine, which is these 11 strange pillars. And here's AA beyond that, which has got this massive pit in it, which we'll call, as I said, the pillars, the pit shrine. Okay. And this is what the pillar shrine structure AB looks like. It has these 10 pillars carved out of the bedrock. Now, this is an incredibly difficult thing to do. I mean, and bear in mind, this is being done 11,000 years ago. And it's that you've got like these knobs on the top of the pillars, which are actually part of the bedrock and are part of a much harder rock on the top of them. And they cut down beyond them into a softer limestone. You can see that the different levels of the limestone here. Here's the harder member, as they call it, and then the softer one here. I know there's a lot of phallic words coming into this, but don't worry, because quite clearly some people have said that these 10 pillars, which are added to by an 11th pillar, which is curved here, are phallic in nature. I can't argue with that, because quite clearly they are phallic in nature. But I think they're far more than that, as we'll go into that. And here you have this strange carved human head. And I think that this is so important. Neshmi Carroll's already mentioned this. Graham Hancock talks about this in his blog. And this is crucial to understand this whole ritual process of what's going on here. I mean, it's a head on a long neck. And I won't be revealing any secrets at this point if I say that I'm pretty certain that that neck is serpentine in nature. But just look at it. I mean, look at the very heavy brows, the nose. Obviously, the mouth is open, indicating possibly speech, something coming out, something being said. And I mean, it almost looks as if he's wearing a helmet. But of course, I don't think he is, which tends to suggest that, you know, the anatomy is a little peculiar, but let's not worry too much about that. Let's go back to that porthole stone to try and understand more of what the pillar shrine represents. Because at Göbekli Tepe, we also have these strange holes in the enclosures. They're there in a number of the enclosures, and they're always in the same position, and that same position relates to where it is in the pillar shrine at Karahan Tepe, and that's in either the the northwest. Here we have enclosure D at Göbekli Tepe. You can see its beautiful elliptical geometry, which is based not on 6'5" or 32'27", but actually on just a straight 4. And that is perfectly synced in with the central pillars and their positioning. This was work that was done again by Rodney Hale to establish all this. But if you take the axis through that ellipse, it hits this stone. And that stone there is this stone that you can see here, which is what we call a porthole stone. And it may well have been astronomically aligned, basically. We'll come on to that. And it's not the only enclosure to have these. This is enclosure C. That's also got a porthole stone in exactly the same position. It's numbered 53 in this particular enclosure, bearing in mind that the inner enclosure of C, structure C, would not have been there when the whole thing was created. That's later, and that comes from Klaus Schmidt himself. So in other words, you'd have been able to stand in the center and look through that hole, which, by the way, has fallen over. That's why it's not precisely in line. As you can see it here, it's fallen over and broken. Type of porthole stone as you find in enclosure D. And that's its position. There's a photograph of it there. We found this on one of the tours that we did there with Megalithomania. And those are the two porthole stones together. So what exactly are they? Well, they represent what we call soul holes, in German Seelenloch. And these are for the passage of the soul leaving the realm of the living, and going into a liminal realm or a otherworldly realm. And usually these are no more than the size of a human head. And the reason for this is because in the Anatolian Neolithic, the soul was seen to be represented by the human skull or the human head. So in many ways, it only needed to be that size to allow the soul to pass through it. So when we actually come to the pillar shrine at Karahan, we find that the soul hole, which is 70 centimeters across, is much bigger and allows a human to crawl through it. So here we have a development. The porthole stone, the hole, the soul hole, has now got much bigger and allows you to enter into this shrine with all these strange phallic looking pillars. And its reason for this is that the pillar shrine represents a liminal realm. In other words, almost a place betwixt the land of the living and the other world. So it's almost seen as a midway point, a space, between one world and the next. And if that's the case, then I think that it's very likely that these pillars represent ancestors. Yes, they may be phallic in looking. I don't know why that is. It may be to do with energy relating to, to sexuality, regeneration, etc. But they represent ancestors, I think. And by the way, there is a stone here, as I said, an 11th stone that's in its own slot. This is not cut out of the bedrock. And this one seems to be curved. And I think this one's animistic in form. It represents a creature of the natural world, most obviously a snake, but it could be a crocodile. It's definitely a reptilian sort of feel to it. And this serpentine reptilian snake symbolism is found all over Karahan Tepe. I mean, here's an example here that links the pillar shrine with the pit shrine, and it's this incredible carved groove that is unquestionably in the shape of a snake. Now, it's been suggested by the archaeologists that maybe a liquid, water or whatever, was allowed to flow along this into the pillar shrine. That may be the case, but the straightforward abstract symbolism is that this is a snake. And once you get into the pit shrine, which is the next part of the journey, where you've got this incredible pit in the ground, I mean, possibly as much as 5 or 6 feet deep, and even what appears to be like a springboard that you leap into it or somehow get down into it. You possibly had a ladder. They're by this oval, an incredible snake. And this is it. Sorry, the image is not as good as it should be, but you can see this really long, pecked out snake around the whole of this bench. This is a bench. And you would presumably have sat on that, whether you'd have been on your own or whether you'd have been with other initiates or aspirants or whatever, not sure. But this quite clearly is significant. And right at the end of it is a fox, a single fox. And that, I believe, is very significant, and we'll come back to that. Now, there are at least 3 pillars found at Karahan that have snakes on them. This is the one that was found by the 90s. I know of at least another 2 that are rumoured to exist that were supposedly found by him and removed. Now, I haven't seen the pictures of those specifically, so I can't confirm them. But the snake-like influence of this place, so just bear that in mind, because, there's a significance here to do with the snake and this serpentine journey of the soul, the way that you would almost have to wriggle through from the great ellipse into the pillar shrine, almost like a snake. And once you're in there, you would come face to face with this carved head on this long neck, which I'm certain is what I would refer to as a snake genius. In other words, this is a snake coming out of the rock with the head of a human. There's an example of a human-headed snake here from the 13th century, an old Ottoman manuscript. This is what I think is emerging out of that rock. That's what you would encounter once you were inside that pillar shrine, along with the ancestors itself. So, in other words, the pillars themselves represent the ancestors. Then you've got this weird curved stone that probably represents either a snake or some other reptilian. And you've got this carved head here, which is going to greet you once you are ready to connect with whatever influence it is that's prepared to talk to you and take you on to the next level. Now, bearing in mind that I mentioned that there was an alignment relating to the great ellipse into the pillar shrine. Now, this is where this becomes important. It's at an azimuth of 341. It quite clearly goes through the center of the pillar shrine. So where does it go? Well, the answer is that if you continue that line about, I think it's about a mile and a half, you come to this extraordinary hill that's prominent on the northwestern horizon as you stand on the top of Karahan Tepe, right above those special buildings called Karahan Tepe. And Karahan Tepe is somewhere that I realized was significant many years ago and clearly forms part of the ceremonial complex and landscape of the area. And this is what it looks like. This is from the farmhouse at Karahan, which, by the way, is also called Karahan. And here's me investigating Karahan Tepe and a place called the Snake Pit. And the reason why it's called the Snake Pit, and it's actually a beehive-shaped cave that's been carved out, and I believe probably is pre-pottery and Neolithic in date. In other words, it is Karahan, which is at the top. You can see Karahan Tepe from this position. And the reason why I'm so covered up is because we'd been told by the owners of the farm that this was a place of snakes. And expect to encounter them in here and in the other caves. And although we didn't encounter them, what I think is that this is some kind of ancestral memory of the importance of snakes to this location. And I think, again, this is a significant thing. It's a folk memory. And what you've got within Karahan Tepe are these extraordinary caves, the only caves in the whole of the area, we are told by the local farmers. And that has got to be beyond coincidence. Here is one of them from the inside. They're massive. And they have been carved out by human hands. No question of that at all. You can see here the rectilinear carving inside them. And as far as I'm concerned, this is pre-pottery and Neolithic. And I tell you for why. Because here and there are scatterings of fragments of stone tools, which date back to Karahan itself, just to the south. And there is nothing else. There is no other evidence of human activity right the way through until the medieval times. And then you've got Arabic, shattered pottery and bits and pieces. And I don't believe that they were cut at that time. So that, to me, suggests that they date back at least 11,000 years. On the other side of Karahan, those were on the west. There's two big caves on the west, and there's another one on the east, which you can see this entrance to here. And it's much more difficult to explore. But myself and one of the members that came on our tours was lucky enough to go down into these caves to explore this depth. And although we didn't find any evidence of human activity, I am positive that these relate to the functional nature of the hill and would have been used for that purpose as early as 11,000 BC. And there is an incredible structure on the top of Kacheli as well. You can see it here. It is what we call the rock temple, and it is rectilinear. You can see it here on its west side. You have these huge blocks. It has these steps going up on the northern side. There is an entrance on the east. Here's the plan I've done of it. And as far as I'm concerned, this also dates to pre-pottery and Neolithic age. Now, what do the archaeologists say about this? Well, Karahan Tepe definitely visited Kacheli Tepe. I think that he took a cursory look at the site and suggested that it probably was part of quarries or something like that. But I think it's far, far more than simply quarries. And I think the archaeologists do, if they're not already doing so, need to look further into these structures on Kacheli Tepe, because they are integral to this ceremonial landscape. And as I said, this rock temple is clearly blocked off on its western side. This is deliberate, so that it faces out towards the east or north, but not the south, because it rises up towards a ridge. And there's other evidence of carving just above the snake pit. There is this carved part of the rock. Again, I suggest that that is also pre-pottery Neolithic and forms either part of a structure, or of course it could be part of a quarry. I mean, obviously that's not to say they did not take rock from Kacheli, but I think that it had a functional nature. And if they were taking rock from Kacheli to Karahan, that itself had a symbolic entangled purpose. I mentioned earlier that the actual farm is called Kacheli. Now, in Turkish, Kacheli means goat or bald head. Nothing mystical there, you would say. But in Kurdish, it means woman, mother, or queen. And I think that's far, far more significant. And although the Turks tried to change all place names in Turkey when they took over in the 20th century to eradicate the folklore and memory and traditions of local places, they couldn't hit every single site, obviously. And I think Kacheli is a very ancient name. And what I think is important here with Kacheli is that it represented what might be referred to as a place of emergence, what's known as a sipapu in Hopi and Zuni tradition in North America, a place that the first human beings, the first ancestors emerged from, often coming out of a hole through a cave at the beginning of the current world age. And often there are stories that this was the place where humanity, survived cataclysm or something and emerged out of it. So to me, Kacheli is a place of the ancestors, and it's no coincidence that it forms part of the same alignment with the Pillar Shrine, and that those ancestors could be seen to be coming from Kacheli itself to Karahan. In other words, the energy of the ancestors are being drawn into the big ellipse via the Pillar Shrine. Okay, now, as obviously you heard Greg earlier talking about the Path of Soul's journey. Well, here it is, or certainly some form of it, in 9000 BC at Karahan Tepe, because the exact orientation of the Pillar Shrine, there we go, through the ellipse, through the Pillar Shrine, towards Kacheli, which is here. If you follow that line to the horizon, you would have seen in 9000 BC the setting precisely at that point of Deneb, the brightest star in the constellation of Cygnus. Now, back in 2004, when I went to Göbekli Tepe for the first time, obviously my mind, and the result of that was a book called The Cygnus Mystery. And what this proposed was that Göbekli Tepe, its main enclosures were aligned to the setting of Deneb, the constellation of Cygnus, at the time, well, any time of year or most of the year. But obviously at the time of the construction of the place, of course. And this line went through the central axis of the central pillars through what we would eventually find would be the position of the porthole stone to the setting of Deneb. Now, this is all in various of my books: Cygnus Mystery, Cygnus Key, Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods. I think it's in Denisovan Origins. And the importance of all of this was probably not something that I realised when I first came across this idea. And it wasn't until many years later, as Greg has explained, that it was realised that across North America, but also we know in Mexico and also even as far south as Peru, there is this universal journey of the soul in death, the path of the soul's journey along the Milky Way, involving two particular constellations, and that's Orion and Cygnus, a journey that begins at Orion and eventually you go to this jumping off point in the sky, which is marked by the Cygnus constellation, but also the Milky Way, the so-called dark rift of the Milky Way, which rises up to the point of Cygnus, and you have this dark doorway there, which has been seen by many ancient cultures as the point of or entrance into the sky world. The Maya, for instance, referred to it as the road of Zilbalba. And you'll find alignments towards Cygnus at Palenque, for instance, that relate to this specific alignment. So, as Greg said, and as Graham Hancock has said, that the path of soul's journey involving Orion and Cygnus is at least 12,000 years old, because it exists both on the American continent and on the Eurasian continent, and also in Egypt, in Africa. Therefore, it was a time when all of these continents were linked in some way, which means it's at least 12,000 years old. I think it's a minimum of 17 to 18,000 years old, and arguably even more. But it's found, obviously, amongst the mound sites. It's found in Egypt, and it's Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. Now, when I came up with the ideas to do with Deneb and Cygnus in 2004 initially, this was new to me. I had no particular interest in Cygnus. But then many years later, this particular alignment would be confirmed by Italian scientists, Alessandro De Laurentiis and Vincenzo Orfino. You can see what they've written here in 2015. The orientations of the Göbekli Tepe towards the setting of Deneb and Cygnus and the relative dating proposed by Collins have been verified in this work by means of the application of a new archaeoastronomical procedure. So that's important. You know, when I come up with these ideas, it's just me. But when sensible people say them, start taking notice of it, please. And remember, when I came up with this is what it looked like, a very basic plan of the site available to us. And the reason why you've got this red oval here is because where that Earth is, right over here, is where they would find. And that is what's known as Pillar 43, or what I called many years ago the vulture stone, and it's a name that's stuck and been used again and again. And this is the most important stone in the Indian because it's a sky map. As early as 2010, Juan Antonio Belmonte, a very well-known archaeoastronomer, worked out that the scorpion that was below the head, main part of the stone, almost certainly represented the constellation of Scorpius. This was in 2010. The same year, a Armenian scientist by the name of Professor Vagin Varadayan, please excuse the pronunciations of the Russian, Armenian, Slavonic University, identified the vulture as Cygnus, and also that the whole thing was clearly a sky map. So you've got Cygnus on there, you've got Scorpius on there, and these were two separate studies done the same year. And so, you know, to me, I began to realize that the vulture stone was quite clearly part of this path of soul's death journey, about going up the dark rift, ending at Cygnus, going through some kind of hole in the sky, and entering into an afterlife. Again, as I say, you'll find that in various of my books. And the key symbol associated with that journey at Göbekli Tepe and at the other Neolithic sites in Anatolia is the vulture. And that's because the vulture is associated with the idea of excarnation, picking clean of the body, the idea that the vulture may act as a psychopomp, taking away the soul into the afterlife. And also it is identified with Cygnus in various traditions. It's there in Greek myth, it's there in Sumerian myth, and it's also there in Armenian star lore, where the constellation of Anjek, which essentially means angel, by the way, is a vulture. And if you remember that Armenia used to stretch right the way down to Şanlıurfa and would have involved the area around Göbekli Tepe. That's very, very important. But we're not talking about Göbekli Tepe. We're talking about Karahan, and we're talking about the importance of the snake, because it would seem as if the main totem at Karahan was not the vulture, certainly not what we found as yet, but the snake. So why the snake? What's going on there? Well, obviously, in the pit shrine, as we already saw, there was this incredibly long snake. And as I mentioned earlier, at the end of it was this fox. Now, there's lots of foxes on stones at Göbekli Tepe, but there's only one that I know of at Karahan Tepe, and only one certainly within the shrines that have been explored so far. And it's here, right at the end of this long serpent. So what could that possibly mean? Well, let's go back to our sky map at Göbekli Tepe, because we find, and I went into detail in this in my book, The Cygnus Key in 2018, and I wanted to go into even more detail, but I think I cut some of it out, but is that there is only one fox on the vulture stone, which you can see here, and only one snake, and that's directly above it. And if the scorpion does represent the constellation of Scorpius, does it not make sense that this serpent and the fox are relations that were known to the pre-pottery Neolithic people in the vicinity of Scorpius? Scorpius, obviously, we know is a constellation that's not only a zodiacal constellation, a zodiacal sign, but also it relates very strongly to death. As Greg pointed out in the Path of Soul's journey, it represents a water serpent, but also the water panther. And the star Antares in Scorpio was very, very important, but was seen as a very dangerous star. And it had to have set before the soul journey could take place. Otherwise, the soul could be drawn into the void, lost forever. And I think that it was similar to this. And I explain all of this in the Cygnus Key. And I think even the Göbekli Tepe Genesis of Gods, another book. Now, a few years ago, my colleague Rodney Hale, I think, found the key to the vulture stone. What he worked out is that the ball that was on the wing of the vulture represented the northern celestial pole as it was in 9600 BC when the vulture zone was created, and of course the enclosure around it, which is enclosure D, was constructed. And if it was the northern celestial pole, the turning point of the heavens, then everything else seemed to fall into place. For instance, the main vulture, most of that formed the constellation of Cygnus, as you can see, even with the star Deneb representing its eye. And it would seem also to have sat on the local horizon as far as the difference between the head and the base of the stone. Then out of sight, below the horizon, in the underworld, would have been Scorpius. And there are other features which I don't want to go into, but another vulture we got here with his head, probably the actual ball itself, because as I mentioned earlier, the ball was an abstract symbol of the human soul, the human head, the human skull. Often this was represented, and I've got references to this. And, you know, so in other words, there's lots of features on here. But what about the fox and the serpent? Well, they fall in the area of Sagittarius and Ophiuchus. And I found references to just such constellations in various lesser known star laws of the Near East and even as far as Egypt. So is it possible, therefore, that the snake and the fox seen within the pit shrine at Karahan Tepe were constellations in the vicinity of Scorpius? Well, it was then that I discovered something very, very important, because whereas the pillar shrine here is aligned towards Cacelli, and beyond it, the setting of Deneb in Cygnus, the pit shrine was very clearly on a different alignment. And in the knowledge that you could walk through one into the other, and then out here onto the bedrock, where you could now view the whole western horizon, I checked the alignment of the pit shrine, double checked it with Google Earth as well, and found that it aligns within 1 degree. And let's point out, with all of this stuff, we need to be aware that this is all tentative at the moment until we get proper survey plans. But it's within 1 degree of the setting of the sun at the time of midsummer in 9000 BC. So that's very, very significant in itself. In other words, either the ritual, if you like, would be planned to end at that time, or perhaps it began, or whatever, at sunset. But this is what happens later on that same night, just 2.5 hours later. Now it's got dust seen at exactly the same position as the sun setting would have been the Milky Way rising vertically upwards with the galactic equator perfectly aligned as well. And that's just 2.5 hours later. So in other words, if we're talking about a path of soul's journey, then this somehow forms part of it. How exactly, we can only but speculate. But what's so interesting is that when this particular alignment would occur, Scorpius would have by now gone beneath the horizon, so it's now in the underworld. But either side of the Milky Way, which in many traditions was seen as like a cosmic tree, you have on one side Ophiuchus, and on the other side Sagittarius, the two constellations that I'd associated with the serpent and the fox in the association with the vulture stone at Göbekli Tepe. There you go. And what I also find intriguing is that into this mix, right in the center of it all, but just below the horizon at the point of that alignment that you just saw, is galactic center. The galactic center very clearly is the center of the Milky Way galaxy. And there is some evidence that the ancients were aware of galactic center and may well have seen it as in some way influencing fate and destiny. We can see this, for instance, from the work of John Major Jenkins in the various books that he did in the lead up to 2012 in association with the Maya. Some quite extraordinary stuff there to do with alignments to galactic center. And I am wondering whether the builders of Karahan were factoring in galactic center into the alignments and the rituals that they were doing there. And in particular, is it possible that galactic center was seen in association with, and that the cosmic serpent was seen to be some kind of omnipotent cosmic force that becomes significant to their beliefs and practices and their understandings of cosmic wisdom and knowledge. Here you can see Sagittarius and Scorpius. Scorpius, by the way, we know as a scorpion, of course, but one of its other forms was as a snake or serpent. So I think that the snake that's been illuminated, and also Göbekli, of course, is probably a much larger constellation that was seen to be in this vicinity, in the vicinity of Sagittarius, Scorpius, and of course Ophiuchus, who is the serpent bearer, who's also known as the snake charmer in Arabic sky lore. And of course, when you're talking about snake charmers, you're talking about snake shamans. And snake shaman was practicing the Karahan Tepe. And it's also worth pointing out that Ophiuchus is often seen to be the 13th sign of the zodiac. The sun passes through it each year between November the 29th and I think it's December the 17th for 18 days. I mean, that's a hell of a lot. And that's actually passes through Scorpius, which I think is only 9 days. But of course, the division of the year based on the zodiacal signs is equal divisions of 30 degrees. And that doesn't relate directly to the sidereal year and the positions of the actual zodiacal constellations. But I find that of interest itself. So is Ophiuchus the guardian serpent? That serpent today is seen in terms of the stars making up serpens. In other words, the serpent who he holds, and you can see here. But as I said, I think that snake was far more larger in the past. And if we're talking in terms of snake shamans, snake charmers, snake bearers, then we go back to what I said angels in 1996, that the key symbol of the elite that created the culture and the civilization of the ancients that we're now dealing with was the snake, and that those traditions were passed down from the Neolithic right the way through to indigenous people who survive in that region even to this. And I talk most obviously of the Yazidis. You can see here the entrance doorway into the shrine of Sheikh Adi at Lalesh, just over the border from Turkey in northern Iraq, where you have this black snake. The black snake is key to the celestial beliefs of the Yazidis. So, in summary then, I think that there was a serpentine journey through the subterranean instruct Karahan to gain wisdom of the ancestors and knowledge of the cosmic, and that the point of communication was this head. And this is based on the discoveries so far. God knows what will be found there in the future. I mean, there are so many exciting things going on there that it's just filling my mind. I mean, I can reveal to you probably for the last 5 days, I've actually been dreaming every night about Karahan Tepe. And that sounds a bit over the top, but I can't help it. That's how strongly this place is affecting me. And I just want to point this out, even though part of it's obscured by the people I can see on the right, but only this is what David Rowe said of From the Ashes of Angels when he read it for a review. Only time and further study will confirm whether Andrew Collins' hypothesis of a prehistoric date existing in the mountains of eastern Turkey. If he is right, then this book will have staked its claim as a major contributor to the study of the genesis of civilization. And I think that I deserve to be credited with having achieved that aim. So with that, I'll say thank you very much. And I'll just point out a couple of books. Obviously, I did in 2014, Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods, which is obviously still available. The Temple of the Watchers and Discovery of Eden. 2018, the Cygnus Key, which showed that the pre-pottery and Neolithic world of southeast Turkey goes into Egypt, and that the knowledge and wisdom created the awareness that eventually led to the Pyramid Age, particularly via a site called Helwan. Structures similar to Karahan Tepe were built at around 9000 BC. And Origins of the Gods, the Kesem Cave, Skinwalkers, and Contact with Transdimensional Intelligences. It's got a foreword by Eric von Daniken. And what's so weird is that even though this is quoting it, I've said almost nothing about it whatsoever, which must give me some credit, I suppose. Anyway, my website is andrewcollins.com. Yeah, you can see there. I'm on all of the obvious social media. And if you want to talk all about this here or by email or through messaging, then please do. So thank you very much. And we'll take some questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew. Highly appreciated. I think Karahan Tepe is just at the cutting edge of everything. It's just something about it. Myself and JJ, when them new discoveries that came out, we were just like, what? We couldn't get it off our brains. There's something remarkable there. So is there any, we've got a couple of questions coming in. So Vicky Tate asks, do you think the very heavy brows on the snake head could represent the overhanging brow ridges, such as found in Neanderthal humans?
Sorry, I'm just trying to get myself central. Yes, possibly. Yeah. I mean, probably not directly, but I think it could be some kind of ancestral memory of the original wisdom bringers. Because, I mean, I think we have to see Karahan as I said, the progeny of Göbekli Tepe. I, years ago, suggested that what was going was almost the result of a schism that took place at Göbekli, and that some people that wanted to keep doing, the deeper stuff moved away into the Teknek Mountains and created their own center. I stick with that. And from all the evidence we found, I think that's actually so. That's the case. But what this means, therefore, is that the builders of Karahan are from Göbekli Tepe. They're not from the extreme north, which is what I've suggested in my books to do with the builders of Göbekli Tepe. They're not from the south. They are indigenous peoples that have created this. But what I do believe is that they had contact through trade, communication, both with the north, as far north as the Russian steppe, the Urals, and as far south as Egypt. So this is truly the result of a cosmopolitan vision of connection with the cosmic source, if you like.
Thank you. I think Hugh Evans has already had his question answered somehow, but he mentions that it was Deneb, the pole star, 16,000 BCE.
Yes, it was. Yeah. And I mean, as I said, Graham Hancock said that the Path of Soul's journey is at least 12,000 years old. And what that means is that that's the minimum age that it can be. And because Deneb was the pole star around 15 to 1000 BC, I'm pretty certain that a lot of these ideas codified around that time, and that they are leftovers. In other words, the significance of that star synchronizing both with the Milky Way and the celestial pole was an incredible, powerful motive in the sky, and that even after the celestial pole started to drift away from the Milky Way and enter into the constellation of Lyra, where it eventually focused on the star Vega, which was about 13,000, 12,000 BC. Then I think that, there was like a mix. Some people went with the new ideas, some people stayed with Deneb, and this was the situation as it came down through to the pre-Pottery Neolithic age, about 9,600, when Göbekli Tepe was constructed. The significance of Deneb was still there. That's why it's there. But of course, there are many different stars. So, other cultures would have adopted other stars as well that were significant, including Sirius, of course, the Pleiades and whatever. So, this isn't the be all or end all stars, but it is part of this universal path of soul's death journey.
Nick D asks, if the serpent is the symbol of knowledge, could the Milky Way be the tree of life element of the journey?
Well, yeah, probably. Yeah. I mean, if you're looking at the most obvious symbolism here, if you think of, let's say, the serpent of knowledge in the Garden of Eden, then the serpent itself represents some kind of stellar influence, and the tree itself very obviously represents the Milky Way. And remember, it's supposed to be in the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden is the area around Karahan Tepe. Klaus Schmidt said to one journalist that he thought that Göbekli Tepe was not just the Garden of Eden, but separately he wrote that it was also the so-called Duku Mount of Sumerian tradition, which was the home of the where it was said that the Anunnaki builder gods gave humanity the first sheep and the first grain. In other words, agriculture and animal husbandry. So, this was the cradle of civilization. This area was Eden. This is exactly what I said in From the Ashes of Angels in 1996. I've said it various times in books. Whereas, of course, the orthodox idea about Eden is that it's somewhere in lower Iraq, near Basra or somewhere like that, which is a medieval creation that has no basis in reality.
Okay. We've got a couple more questions. One of these I want to save for the panels. I think JJ might want to answer this one as well. But Annabelle asks, when I look at that face, I assume the Karahan Tepe face, I see the T formation and the T formation above the soul or snake hole. Did you notice that? Any ideas on that?
So, okay, sorry. So we're talking about the carved head, yeah?
I think so.
And the snake hole. What's the snake hole then?
The hole that goes through into the next.
Oh, right. Well, I mean, it's all part of it, isn't it? I mean, as I said, I asked Graham when I first started looking into the Karahan discoveries. I said, is there a direct link from the Great Ellipse or into the Pillar Shrine? He said, yes, indeed, there is. He said that you crawl through this tiny circular hole, you wriggle through it, and the first thing that you see on the inside is this head that almost looks at you. And it's all part of this experiential journey of the soul, I think, going from the world of the living into a sort of liminal space, and then beyond that, into the sky world itself. So it's like a 3-part journey. But as I said, the important thing to remember is that there's loads of new things being discovered there. This could just be some small part of a much bigger process there.
Okay, well, I think if it's okay with Jackie and Vicky, we're going to save these questions for the panel because we can get more than one answer for these, I think. So I want to thank you, Andrew. Thanks for joining us. We've got more questions, but I think we'll save these for the panel. We've got even more questions. And so we're going to be back at 15:15, like 15 minutes, where Andrew's going to join us with Greg, Scott, Jim, JJ, and myself, and we're gonna take these questions, take more questions. So please think of some good ones, not too difficult ones, so please, and we'll get into them then. So I think people probably need a break for like 15 minutes before we jump back in. So again, thank you, Andrew. This Karahan Tepe it's affecting us all. I think it's like there's something about it. And I think, the fact we've been there as well so many times and always wondered what's going on beneath our feet. It's like, wow. So to have that opportunity to actually see that for the first time is quite remarkable. So thank you, everybody. So we will be back, like I said, 15 minutes from now. We'll be back a couple of minutes before that to set everything up for the panel. And we look forward to seeing you all there. Okay, take care. See you in a moment.